When she found her mother-in-law's phone hidden under the couch cushions, still recording, she realized the woman had been listening to her most private moments for months. But what she discovered in those recordings was far worse than she ever imagined. Sarah thought she was going crazy. For the past 6 months, her mother-in-law Linda seemed to know everything about her life before she even shared it. When Sarah mentioned having a rough day at work, Linda would somehow already know the exact details. When she confided in her husband about their marriage problems, Linda would make pointed comments the very next day. At first, Sarah attributed it to mother's intuition. Linda had always been protective of her son Mark, and maybe she was just good at reading people. But the incidents kept piling up, each one more unsettling than the last. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in March. Sarah had just gotten off a particularly emotional phone call with her sister about their father's declining health. She'd been crying, sharing her deepest fears about losing him, speaking words she'd never said aloud to anyone else. The conversation happened in her living room, with her husband at work and Linda supposedly running errands. The next morning, Linda called. "I've been thinking about your father's situation," Linda said, her voice dripping with false concern. "You mentioned yesterday how scared you are about his memory getting worse, and how guilty you feel about not visiting more often." Sarah's blood ran cold. She had never told Linda any of those details. In fact, she hadn't even told her husband Mark yet. The conversation with her sister had been completely private, or so she thought. I never told you about that conversation," Sarah stammered. Linda's laugh was sharp and calculated. "Oh, honey, you talk so loudly on the phone." Sound travels in these old houses, but Sarah knew better. Their house wasn't old, and she'd been speaking in barely above a whisper during that emotional call. Something was terribly wrong. That evening, Sarah began what she would later call her investigation phase. She started paying attention to every detail, every conversation, every moment. Linda seemed to know more than she should. The pattern became undeniable. When Sarah had a private argument with Mark about their finances, Linda knew the exact amount of their credit card debt by the next day. When Sarah confided to her best friend over coffee about considering therapy, Linda made a snide comment about people who can't handle their own problems. Just hours later, the final straw came during what Sarah thought was a private moment with her husband. They were discussing the possibility of having children, a conversation they'd agreed to keep between themselves until they made a decision. Sarah had expressed her fears about motherhood, her worries about Linda's involvement in their lives, and her concern about bringing a child into such a tense family dynamic. 2 days later, Linda cornered Sarah in the kitchen. "I hope you're not seriously considering therapy before having children," Linda said with a twisted smile. "Mark deserves a wife who can handle motherhood without falling apart." Sarah's hands began to shake. Those were her exact words from the private conversation with Mark. Not similar words, not the general idea. Her exact phrasing repeated back to her like a weapon. That's when Sarah decided to search the house. She waited until Linda left for her weekly bridge game, and Mark was at his evening gym session. Starting in the living room where most of their private conversations took place, Sarah began a methodical search. She moved furniture, checked behind picture frames, examined every possible hiding spot. Under the third couch cushion, her fingers touched something that didn't belong. A small, sleek smartphone she didn't recognize, still warm from being recently active. The screen showed a recording app that had been running for over 3 hours. Sarah's world tilted on its axis. Her mother-in-law had been secretly recording every conversation in her own home for months. With trembling hands, Sarah scrolled through the phone's files. Dozens of audio recordings, each one labeled with dates and brief descriptions. Sarah work complaints, March 3rd, marriage problems discussion, February 28th, father's health concerns, March 15th. The recordings went back 8 months. 8 months of her most private thoughts, her vulnerable moments, her intimate conversations with her husband, all captured and cataloged like evidence in some twisted case against her. But as Sarah listened to the recordings, she discovered something that made her stomach drop even further. These weren't just being collected for Linda's personal use. In several recordings, she could hear Linda's voice commenting in real time, as if she was taking notes or preparing talking points. She's finally admitting she's not ready for children, Linda's voice whispered during one of Sarah's private conversations with Mark. This is perfect ammunition. In another recording, Linda could be heard coaching someone else, a voice Sarah didn't immediately recognize. When she brings up therapy, make sure to mention how it shows weakness. Use her exact words about falling apart against her. Sarah realized with growing horror that Linda wasn't working alone. She was part of some coordinated effort to undermine Sarah's marriage, using her own words as weapons against her. The mystery voice became clear when Sarah found recordings from Linda's phone calls. It was Linda's sister, Patricia, who had never liked Sarah either. The two women had been strategizing for months, using the secret recordings to plan their attacks on Sarah's confidence, her marriage, and her relationship with Mark. The recording from last Tuesday is gold, Linda told Patricia in one phone call. She actually said she sometimes wonders if Mark married the right person. We can use that to make him think she's having doubts about the marriage. Sarah sat in her living room, surrounded by evidence of the most intimate betrayal she'd ever experienced. Her mother-in-law hadn't just been eavesdropping, she'd been conducting psychological warfare, using Sarah's own vulnerabilities against her in a calculated campaign to destroy her marriage. When Mark came home from the gym that evening, Sarah was waiting with the phone and a printed list of every recording. She'd spent hours documenting everything, preparing for the conversation that would either save or end their marriage. "We need to talk," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. Mark's reaction would determine everything. Would he believe the evidence right in front of him, or would he choose his mother's side as he'd done so many times before? The phone sat between them on the coffee table, still containing hours of recordings that would expose not just Linda's betrayal, but the depth of the conspiracy against their marriage. What Sarah discovered when she finally confronted both Mark and Linda would reveal family secrets that went back decades and force her to make a choice that would change her life forever. But that's a story for the next part of this unbelievable tale of family betrayal and secret recordings that nearly destroyed everything Sarah held dear.